Good evening, and welcome to our in-depth coverage of a seismic clash that's rocking the global stage. Just moments ago, reports confirmed that President Donald Trump is furious over Brazil's defiance of his unprecedented 50% tariff on all Brazilian imports, a move tied directly to the ongoing criminal trial of his ally, former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a high-stakes geopolitical showdown between the United States and Latin America's largest economy, with ripple effects that could reshape markets, politics, and international relations. Let's unpack this explosive story and explore what's at stake for both nations and the world. On July 9, 2025, President Trump posted a blistering letter on Truth Social addressed to Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, known as Lula. In it, he announced that starting August 1st, the U.S. would slap a 50% tariff on all Brazilian goods. This isn't a routine trade policy. Trump's reasoning is twofold. He claims Brazil's trade practices create an unfair economic relationship with the U.S., and he calls the prosecution of Jair Bolsonaro, his close political ally, an international disgrace and a witch hunt that must end immediately. Trump's letter was blunt, stating this trial should not be taking place, and accusing Brazil of attacking free elections and American free speech through its judicial actions. He warned that this tariff, separate from other sectoral duties, could escalate if Brazil retaliates. Let's break down the context. Jair Bolsonaro, often dubbed the Trump of the tropics, is a polarizing figure in Brazil. A far-right populist who led Brazil from 2019 to 2022, Bolsonaro lost the 2022 presidential election to Lula in a tight runoff. Instead of conceding, he challenged the results, questioning the integrity of Brazil's electronic voting system. On January 8, 2023, thousands of his supporters stormed Brazil's Congress, Supreme Court, and Presidential Palace in Brasilia, in a violent echo of the January 6, 2021, U.S. Capitol attack. Prosecutors allege Bolsonaro and his allies orchestrated a coup attempt, including plans to assassinate Lula and a Supreme Court justice. Bolsonaro, who was in the U.S. during the riots, denies involvement, framing the charges as political persecution. He's barred from running for office until 2030 and is now on trial before Brazil's Supreme Court, with a verdict possible by September. Trump's connection to Bolsonaro is deep and personal. The two bonded during Trump's first term, meeting at the White House in 2019 and sharing a populist, anti-establishment worldview. Trump sees parallels between Bolsonaro's legal troubles and his own, having faced indictments for trying to overturn the 2020 U.S. election. On July 7th, Trump posted on Truth Social, "This is nothing more or less than an attack on a political opponent, something I know much about. It happened to me, times 10. 2 days later, he called Bolsonaro a highly respected leader and demanded Brazil drop the charges or face economic consequences. For Trump, this tariff is a personal mission to protect an ally and flex U.S. power. Brazil, however, is standing its ground. President Lula, a leftist who has long clashed with Trump, responded with defiance. In a statement on X and his government's website, Lula rejected Trump's claims point by point. He called the trade imbalance accusation inaccurate, noting that the U.S. had a $7.4 billion trade surplus with Brazil in 2024, according to the U.S. Trade Representative. Lula stressed Brazil's sovereignty, declaring, "No one is above the law," and insisted the Bolsonaro trial is a matter for Brazil's independent judiciary, not foreign interference. He warned that any unilateral tariff hike would trigger reciprocal measures under Brazil's economic reciprocity law, which allows countermeasures like import restrictions. In a July 10th interview with Record, Lula doubled down, saying, "If he charges us 50%, we'll charge him 50%. This sets the stage for a potential trade war with global consequences. The economic stakes are massive. The U.S. is Brazil's second-largest trading partner after China, with Brazil exporting $42.3 billion in goods to the U.S. in 2024, including coffee, orange juice, iron, steel, and petroleum. Brazil imported $49.7 billion from the U.S., giving the U.S. a surplus, not a deficit as Trump claimed. A 50% tariff would hit American consumers hard, especially in food. Brazil supplies about a third of U.S. coffee, the world's largest coffee market, with nearly 8 million bags annually, and over half of its orange juice, holding an 80% share of global trade. Industry estimates suggest the tariff could drive up coffee prices, already up from $5.99 to $7.93 per pound since last year due to droughts in Brazil and Vietnam. Orange juice prices could spike too, adding to U.S. inflation woes. The Federal Reserve's July 9th minutes warned that tariff-induced price shocks could derail planned rate cuts. For Brazil, the impact would be catastrophic. The U.S. is a key market for its agriculture and industry, and a 50% tariff would cripple exporters, from coffee farmers to cattle ranchers to Embraer's aviation sector. The Brazilian real fell 2.8% against the dollar on July 9th, hitting 5.6047, its lowest since June 6th. Lula held an emergency meeting with his vice president, finance minister, and others to strategize. Options include appealing to the World Trade Organization or proposing international investigations, but retaliation risks further escalation, as Trump has promised even higher tariffs if Brazil fights back. This puts Lula in a bind: yield to Trump and undermine Brazil's judiciary, or resist and risk economic devastation. The political fallout in Brazil is intense. Trump's tariff threat has ignited a nationalist backlash, with protests in São Paulo last week where demonstrators burned a Trump effigy outside the MASP Art Museum. Many, like 51-year-old teacher Silvana Marques, call Bolsonaro and his family traitors for encouraging Trump's economic attack on Brazil. Columnist Elaine Cantanhede, writing for Estado de São Paulo, argued that Trump's move has backfired, boosting Lula's flagging approval ratings ahead of next year's election. Lula is now positioning himself as a defender of Brazilian sovereignty against Trump and Bolsonaro's anti-patriotic alliance. Political analyst Oliver Stunkel says Lula could gain electorally by framing Bolsonaro's supporters as disloyal. Bolsonaro's camp, however, sees Trump's support as a lifeline. Flavio Bolsonaro, the former president's son and a senator, urged Lula's government to grant amnesty, comparing Brazil's situation to Japan's surrender after World War II, warning of 2 atomic bombs landing on Brazil. Eduardo Bolsonaro, a congressman living in Texas, has been lobbying U.S. officials for months, pushing for sanctions against Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes, who oversees his father's case. Sources close to the White House say Trump's tariff decision was his alone, driven by loyalty to Bolsonaro and frustration with Brazil's hosting of the BRICS summit, which Trump called anti-American. Eduardo hailed the tariff as a success of his lobbying, but some Bolsonaro allies worry it could harm their base, especially agribusiness, which relies on U.S. exports. This dispute also ties into a broader battle over free speech. Trump's letter accused Brazil of insidious attacks on American free speech, citing Supreme Court rulings holding social media platforms accountable for content. Last year, Brazil briefly banned X, owned by Trump ally Elon Musk, for refusing to remove disinformation accounts. The court also fined platforms like Truth Social, Trump's company, and Rumble, backed by conservatives like J.D. Vance and Peter Thiel. Trump announced a Section 301 investigation under the Trade Act of 1974, targeting Brazil's alleged unfair practices against U.S. tech firms. Lula defended these rulings, arguing that Brazilian society rejects hateful content, racism, and speeches against democratic freedom, and that freedom of expression doesn't cover violent practices. The global ramifications are profound. Trump's use of tariffs to influence a foreign trial stretches the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, which he cites to justify the levies. Critics, like law professor Ilya Salmon, argue this is legally dubious, as IEEPA is for national emergencies, not foreign judicial matters. A lawsuit in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit already challenges Trump's earlier reciprocal tariffs, and this move could weaken his administration's credibility. Brazil's membership in BRICS, alongside Russia, China, and others, adds another layer. Trump's prior threat of a 10% tariff on BRICS nations has fueled tensions, and Lula's defiance could inspire other countries to resist, potentially fracturing U.S. trade ties with the global South. Markets are reeling. The Brazilian real's drop reflects fears of a prolonged trade war. Trump's separate 50% tariff on copper imports, announced July 8, spiked prices by 13.1%, hinting at similar disruptions for Brazilian commodities like coffee and steel. Commerzbank analysts warn that the tariff's political motives threaten both the real and the U.S. dollar, as other nations may fear being targeted next. If Brazil retaliates, U.S. exporters, especially in fuels, aircraft, and machinery, could face steep levies, straining industries already hit by global trade uncertainty. Where does this leave us? Trump's rage and Brazil's defiance have set up a high-stakes game of economic brinkmanship. If the tariffs hit on August 1st, American consumers could see higher prices for coffee, orange juice, and other goods, while Brazilian exporters face ruin. Lula's vow to retaliate risks escalation, but yielding could undermine Brazil's sovereignty and embolden Trump to target other nations. For Bolsonaro, Trump's move is a boost for his base but risks alienating moderates who see his U.S. ties as unpatriotic. The outcome hinges on whether diplomacy prevails or both sides double down. This crisis raises bigger questions. Can the U.S. maintain its economic clout when allies like Brazil are pushed to the edge? Will Trump's strategy backfire, strengthening Lula and weakening Bolsonaro's comeback? And what happens if other nations follow Brazil's lead, rejecting U.S. interference? As August 1st looms, the world watches to see who blinks first. Stay tuned as we track this unfolding drama and its impact on markets, politics, and the global order.